it. I wish there's more to listen, but doesn't matter. God's word is good no matter who's around. Amen.
By the
But
way, she wrote to me.
mm,
He said next week.
next week, okay,
Yes.
inshallah, it'll be a blessing to have them.
That's tomorrow.
Yes, we'll play. What was his name again? Khaldun. Khaldun. Interesting name.
Studying.
Ah,
Like very
yeah, it sounds very old-fashioned. Sa'id.
easy.
Ah, Sa'id. Khaldun. I don't know. I'm not gonna remember that, but okay. So last week we started Luke chapter 15. This week we're gonna finish it. And this week's lesson kind of builds off of last week, because last week we talked about the sheep, the lost sheep. And we saw how much the Lord is filled with joy when he can return a lost sheep to his flock, when he can go out, and he is even willing to leave the 99. He's willing to forget even for a moment that he has the 99 there, just to go out and risk saving the one. And so we took a little look into God's heart, and we saw the urgency that he had to save those who are lost. He's happy that he has the ones he has, but his heart, his satisfaction comes in journeying to find the lost ones. He went out of his way in John chapter 4 to meet the woman at the well, right? He didn't have to go through that path, but he went out of his way. He spent time to go speak to her, to give her living water, to give her satisfaction, because he saw her as a lost sheep, having had many husbands and currently living with one that isn't her husband. He saw that she had this desire. There's something missing in her heart. Lord, what is it? I don't know. Yet he met her there and he gave her living water. And when the disciples came back, they're like, what are you doing here? Aren't you hungry? We haven't eaten in days. And Jesus told them, I have food you do not even know of. Meaning what satisfied his soul, what gave him the sense of fullness, was to bring a lost sheep back to the flock. And the Lord is going to express this story in the context of what we know as the prodigal son. And so we're going to read through that, and I hope we learn something about this story today, because it's one of my favorite stories in the whole Bible. So from verse 11, Jesus was speaking, and he said, there was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And when he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. and they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound." But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours comes, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him?" And he said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found." So a lot of people like to put a spin on this story that there was not just one prodigal son, there was two. And in many ways, that's true. And I think there's a lot we can learn about this story in what God's heart is towards us, what his heart is towards the sinner. And we can learn the perspective that we take depending on our situation with God. Are we the son, the first son, or are we the second son? Are we the one who runs from God? Or are we the one who's always the good child, surrounding God, but never really enjoying him fully? And so in the first case, we have the case of the first son, right? He ran away from God. He took the possessions that were supposed to be his. And in this case, it was a lot of money. It was the money he would have received had his father passed. And so he was pretty much saying, just die already. Just give me what I am owed. And let me just live my life. I don't want to be here anymore. There was a disappreciation for his life with the father. So he ran away, took his possessions. He abused his freedom, right? The father didn't stop him. He didn't put guards there, forced him to stay. He recognized his child has the freedom to choose. And that's one thing that God respects more than anything, is our choice, our will. He is always respectful of our choice to either serve him, to run away from him, to reject him, whatever it may be. And in this case, the child uses freedom to engage in the world of darkness and fill himself with the world. He went, and if we look at the verse again, it says, he squandered his property in reckless living. We don't know the specifics, but reckless living is reckless living. It's a life that doesn't care about your health, doesn't care about the health of others, doesn't care about your well-being. It's just, let me live life. It's kind of like today's society of YOLO. Like, I live once, let me just do what I need to do. It doesn't matter who gets hurt, doesn't matter the consequences of my actions. We're all gonna die, so might as well just do whatever, as much as we can until we die. And so that type of living kind of just, it eats at your expenses, right? He spent everything, and then it's not a mindful way to live, because as soon as something happens, a severe famine, in this day and age, we have economic crashes, right? What happened in 2008? For example, stock market crashed, the whole economy crashed. Big companies started going into deep debt. The thing is, the world today, the reason why the economy is alive is because every company is in debt to another company. And what keeps it moving is that they keep following through with their debt. As soon as a giant company can no longer follow through with its debt and promise what it says it will, the economy starts to crash. And so today's world is different, but nevertheless, a famine is characterized as something that's like, boom, Once there was plentiful, now there's not. He wasn't prepared for that. He was in a place with limited belongings, with limited things. He was living the temporary world where one day the money is there, one day it's not. Like, for example, in Lebanon, what happened? These people, when their economy crashed, all their money in the bank gone. These people had millions, maybe, or thousands, or whatever savings they had, wiped. One day there, the next day not. It doesn't matter how successful they were, it's wiped. That's the world, right? Monica, welcome. So we're talking about the prodigal son. And we're going through the running away from God. So the first son, I'm sure you know the story, right? The first son ran away, took his possessions, abused his freedom as a child of God to engage in the world filled with darkness, filled with temporary things. And like the rest of the world, he thought, oh, I'm going to run away from the father. My life is going to be great, right? But like the rest of the world, he ended up empty and unsatisfied, right? Is there anyone immune to the temporary nature of life? No. As much as you consume, as much as you have, it's not for certain. It's temporary. And that's why I wrote this here. No matter how much we are filled with the world, we will never fill the void in our heart with temporary things. Our eternal being must be filled with eternal things to be satisfied. It's like trying to feed your dog vegetables. As many vegetables as I give my dog, they might like it. They're like, oh, it's good. Oh, it's yummy. My dog loves apples. She loves to eat apples. But is it satisfying for me to just feed my dog apples and carrots? No, they want the meat. They were made to eat meat. They're carnivores and somewhat omnivores because they eat other things, but primarily their food of choice is meat. And so they have this satisfaction. When you bust out the chicken, they go through the roof. When you bring the apple, they're like, yum, yum. But like when they see the meat, that's what they really need. That's what satisfies their biological needs. And for us, as humans, we need to recognize we're spiritual beings. We have spiritual needs that cannot be satisfied by human temporary things, right? And so this child dared to find that out for himself. He's like, yeah, I know you say don't do this, don't do that because it's not satisfying, blah, blah, blah. But let me see for myself. And he went out and he saw for himself. And another example is of temporary things is, have you ever been in a situation, I'm sure you have, where you're in summer break, you're in winter break, you're in whatever break, and you count down the days. And no matter how fun it is, all good things come to an end. Isn't that the worst feeling in the world? When you're like, yes, summer just started, but then the months go by and then the summers start to end and you're like dreading, you're like, oh no, there's 2 weeks left, there's 1 week left, there's 5 days left, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1, and you're like dreading it.
Start my life.
Yeah. What? And then you get anxiety and you're like, oh no, we're back to school. I hated that feeling. Like I would almost plan out the vacation in my head. I'm like, the first few days are the best, but then once you start getting close, it's like, it sucks because it's always bothering you that your joy has an end. As long as the break might be, it will end. And that's the world. No matter how enjoyable it is, no matter how grand and how long your life on earth may be, it ends. And do you want to imagine that's just a vacation. Imagine at the end of your life, when you realize, hey, life is starting to catch up. Don't you want to be in a place where you know you're living for the right reasons? I do. I hope we do. And another thing is he fell from glory. He fell from being in the Father's house to being in the the place with the pigs. He was feeding the pigs. He was even desiring to eat what the pigs were eating. He reached such a low point that what the pigs were eating, the rotten mush that they were eating, looked good. He settled with the lowest parts of the world. The lowest things the world can offer, he was settling with because he gave up what he once had. And he fell from many blessings. And the thing is, in the beginning, he didn't appreciate that. He didn't appreciate what he had with God until he reached that point in his life where he lost everything, where he saw the world, he saw the darkness in the world. And in reality, that was actually necessary for him to experience. And there's a reason why God allowed him to do that. He allowed him to leave because he really began to appreciate what he had once he tasted the darkness of the world. For example, have you ever met somebody who grew up rich? Right? Like a friend or whatever, where all they've ever known since they were born was riches. Everything they want handed to them. Lived a very spoiled lifestyle. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's how they're living. Their family's rich, whatever. But do you notice that it's harder for them to appreciate what they have? They expect the best from the beginning. While somebody who was poor, somebody who grew up in a very, impoverished condition, or didn't have everything, or struggled financially, or struggled in some ways, their family was from other countries and they're starting a new life and they're the first generation in this country or whatever it may be. When they rise to riches or they rise to a position, they kind of appreciate it more. I'm not saying in every case. Sometimes they go to riches and they go crazy, worse than another person. But in general, there is an appreciation because you've tasted life with nothing and now you realize what it's like to have. And you can feel that, wow, I appreciate what I have because I knew what it was like not to have. And so this is a reverse situation where he had to be in a position where he had nothing to realize how good God is, to the point where he is content. He said he is content to be a servant, a slave of the Father. He's content to return to the Father just to be a servant, meaning he is content to go back home and have the lowest position home than live in the world again. He's content with having the lowest place with his Father than stay in this life. Meaning he used to have it all, and yet it's enough at least if he has the bare minimum, just as long as he's in the Father's presence. And so that's a huge change. That's a huge change of mindset of where, wow, he had everything. He gave it up, but now he's willing to have a percentage of that, just a touch of that, just restore a little bit. As long as he eats bread, he's eating mush. Just at least the servants eat bread. At least they eat bread. That's enough for me to go back to that. That would be much better. But what happened? And this might be us sometimes. We're tempted to think that God will not accept us because of our sin, that we went too far away from God. We've traveled too far into darkness, that he would never accept us back. But what happened when the Father saw the Son from far away? And this is quoted from the verse, he felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. He didn't care. He was muddy. He was disgusting. He probably stank like a dying cow, but he didn't care. He came with compassion and he hugged him, embraced him and kissed him. And he was so thankful that his son is back. And what did the son say? He's like, He says, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father, he didn't even answer that. He's just like, bring the best robes, bring the ring, put the shoes on his feet, get the calf, let's slaughter it, let's make a feast. My son who was dead is alive again. He who was lost is found. And they began to celebrate. He didn't care. All he cared is his son is back. He didn't care what he did. He didn't care how far deep he went in the mud. He didn't even ask him, what did you do? No, he said, you're back. And see, the thing is, he never went out to search for his son. Why? Because what really makes our coming to God meaningful is when in our will we come back to him. When we come and we choose, when we recognize that what God has is much greater. And so we willingly come to him. That's love. That's appreciation. When we have options, we still choose God. When we have all the things that we can indulge our life and we can surrender our life to many things. There's so many things you can surrender your life to today, especially today. The world is just, they've created every type of entertainment and thing possible for you to indulge in. Yet when out of all those things you choose God, what a celebration. It's like, like if, for example, say, you apply to a job or to a school, and out of 100,000 applicants, they choose one person, that one person is you. Isn't that like, oh my gosh, I was chosen of all people, right? Like to have all these options of people they could have chosen, yet they chose you. There's something special about that. And God appreciates when out of everything in life, we choose him. And so he's so thankful in a way as well that this son is back. This son has returned. He has chosen to be home. He's there because he wants to be, not because he has to be. That's a good feeling. That's something that he is thankful for. And that is worth celebrating. But then, well, actually, let me just go briefly. He gives them a few things. He gives them a robe, signifying God's righteousness, that despite our sin, despite what he has done, he has now clothed him with the highest clothing. That maybe he's not worthy to wear this thing. He's not worthy to be clothed beautifully after what he's done, but that's not the point. The point is God is giving us this gift of righteousness despite what we've done. And then the ring, normally in the olden days, they give rings as a, when a king becomes king, they have a special ring. When they pass on power to someone, they give them a ring. And so he's signifying with this ring that this is his beloved child. It's like almost like a covenant between him and the father, that this is my child, he is home. Let me put this ring on him to signify that he is my son. That wherever you go, people will recognize this is my son. And now we see the elder brother wasn't happy about this. He didn't even dare go in and celebrate. And it's actually quite alarming, because he's not just jealous. One, he is jealous, but it's not just that. Because what was the younger son, the special thing about him leaving is that he appreciated the value of being with the father, right? He left, he tasted life, and he couldn't wait to come back home, even if it was as a slave, because he tasted the other side and he's like, that was disgusting, I want to come home. But the elder son never left. But in his heart, he did not appreciate the presence of the father, or else he would have been happy and rejoicing as well. Because what does the father say to him? He says, son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. So, as his son who stayed with him, he did not recognize that the reward of always being with the Father was having complete and full access to his riches, the spiritual riches. Meaning, while he was physically there, while he didn't disobey the Father like the younger son did, he was not satisfied either, because everything was in front of him. Everything that belongs to God now belongs to him. He did not take advantage of that. He did not appreciate that. He did not have the pleasure of that. Because if he had the pleasure of all the spiritual riches that God was giving him, that God was ready to hand to him, he would have not been upset. He would have been, oh, yay, he's home. He can now indulge into the goodness of God just like me. But that was the problem. He's like, how come you never do this for me? He's saying, are you kidding? You have everything. Anything you want, ask. But apparently he didn't ask. Apparently he lived like he was poor in a rich man's house. And the problem is, so many of us Christians, we're living like this, where we have full access to God's riches. We have full access to God's peace, his love, his goodness, every beautiful thing we can think of. It's all with God, yet we never seek to access it. And we complain, God, I don't like my Christian life. I'm upset. I'm anxious. I'm depressed. I'm this, I'm that. And God's like, well, everything I have is yours. Just come take it. That's the problem. We don't come take it. We don't come spend time with God. We don't come read our Bible. We don't come pray. We don't spend time with the Lord, and we question why our Christian life is just bland. See, the thing is, what's beautiful about the younger child is that he now appreciates it. He appreciates what the Father has to give, because he's tasted the other side, and now he cannot wait but to read his Bible. Probably, if this was a situation where a person came back home, sometimes the strongest Christians are those who were on drugs, who were in the worst situations, who were living the most wretched and disgusting lifestyles, and they turn to God, and their life has changed so passionately because they know what it's like to be living in sin. They know what it's like to live under darkness. And so when they're finally in the light, they cannot help but spend time with God. They cannot help but keep moving on in their Christian life because it's so enjoyable to them. And yet we, especially us who are born in a Christian home, it's like, oh, I'm used to this. And we complain like this elder brother. And this elder brother is also, God is speaking at the Jews, because they were in that situation too. They had everything before God. God gave them all the blessings, and yet they never really accessed it. They just complained. God is taking them to the promised land. What do? They just complain. Life was better before. And so while they're still with God, they're still God's people, they were bitter. And a fear is that we should not be bitter towards God. We should recognize that when God says everything that is mine is yours, we take advantage of that. Would you live like a poor person if your father or your mother's bank account had like $10 million? No. But what if you never knew your parents had that much? Then of course you're going to live like you're poor, because you're like, oh, we don't have money. But then once you realize, oh my gosh, my parents are rich, your lifestyle changes. This is just a physical example, but when we realize God is rich, let our lifestyle change. Let it be filled with God's riches. Let us ask of God, who is willing to give us. Why are we so surprised of miracles? Why are we so surprised when God actually answers our prayers? Does he not want to? Does he not want to bless our life? Does he not want to bless our education? Why do we think that we deserve to not have? No, we do, because we are his children, not because we're special, but I mean, we are special to God, but it's not in our own work, but God just wants to give us. So let us rejoice with those who are being brought to God. Let us rejoice and be thankful. God is bringing lost sheep to his kingdom. And let us be those who are found and not just sitting there, but engaging with God, not bitter in our faith, but thankful that we have, wow, such great riches. Let us awaken in our relationship with God and realize how much that God desires to bless us with. Amen. That makes sense? Any questions? Any comments? Yeah.
It's like how we tie this one spiritual life. I really like the story from real life. Like that the person got that appreciation for that because they worked for that because they appreciate that appreciation. They always think about it still. I feel bad for that because I think we for it. So it really makes it like that in our lives as Christians. That we have on earth, as being a child of God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That he was trying to tell him the reward you have is literally being with me all the time. A greater reward is this, to have full access to God. We don't have to go through those situations. Hopefully. I mean, some people, each person different. The younger son had to go through those things to appreciate. But it's actually better to be able to appreciate God as his child, not to have to go through that. Because even though you go through the darkness and you come back, there's still a lot of consequences you might have to live with in your life, like physical consequences with living in darkness. It's not, you can't just, you're forgiven, but the consequences of living a very reckless life can haunt you for the rest of your physical days. You could ruin your health. You could ruin relationships. You can miss out on so much. So there's such a reward in being close to God. But let us not lose sight of that. Like you're saying, it's so easy to lose appreciation of that. So let us not. Let us seek our reward in God, not in superficial things, but just the fact that we have, like, alone to know that we have eternal life. What a reward. Alone to just know that I am his child forever. What a reward. But more so, let us continue on in our relationship. Let's continue growing. And the more we grow, the more we are filled with God, the more that God is more pleasurable to us. That's why we're doing this. It's to change this. And when we change this, God can change this. Amen. Amen.